program today. As you know, we've been having a series of these for over a year now. We hope to continue and be happy to see all of you back again whenever you can. And just to remind you again, this museum as well as one in Forsyth are part of the White River Valley Historical Society. And both museums and our publications and programs are based upon membership dues and donations, so I always like to point that out. We also are extremely grateful to Barb and Joe Reich for being in this location. Ah, there he is. Thank you, Mr. Reich.
Had trouble finding a place to park.
I was just saying, we're expressing our gratitude to you for using your premises for our museum. We also, again, do urge you, if you're not, to become a member of the Society. Our program in November is on veterans, and there's some of these leaflets on a case back there on the table you might want to take one with you. We're having Brenda Meadows, Gianna Kilbane, and Doyle Goldsworthy, all veterans of military service. One or two of them were with us last year, and it was really highly entertaining. So I urge you to come again in November, if you will, to hear those ladies. Also, let me remind you, just on the other side of this wall is an exhibit on the Toby Show. We happen to have one of the big posters and the story of it. You might like to look at that before you leave. And our today's speaker is Jae McFerron, a well-known and noted actor and director, producer. And I might say that we've had the privilege of seeing the current Toby Show at Shepherdton Hills. We had a very good dinner and a very entertaining show. And I think the rest of you might, if you haven't been there, might like to enjoy it. Well, Jay, I'm always concerned. I don't know whether to flatter you by saying too much or embarrass you by saying too little. So I'm going to let you sort of introduce yourself as you talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Thanks a lot, everybody. If you can't hear me, I will try the microphone. I didn't have much luck with trying to get it to go, so if you have trouble hearing, just raise your hand. Also, as we go along, if there's something you'd like to know, if you have a question, please interrupt me. Please stop and let's just talk. And if you have questions about what I do or what I've done or what the Toby Show is, okay, that would be great. First off, let me say I'm honored to be here. I really am. I've never been in the museum. This is fabulous. It's incredible. There's so many things here that mean a lot to me. Mr. Reich being here is a little nerve-wracking for me. I tell you what, he's one of the living legends in this town. I really mean that. When you think about Branson, when I do, I think about the things that meant a lot to me. I've bought shoes from this man. I bought pants in this building. I ate at the shack, and when the shack was across the street, as a matter of fact, and it's just all part of the wonderful history of Branson. Great to see the Bakers here today. Thanks for coming. Those are folks who mean a lot to me too, and that'll all be part of the story as we go along. I really tried to figure out where I wanted to start with this. I guess we can kind of start at the very beginning, as we do in the Toby Show. When the character of Toby comes around the curtain, the first thing he says to the audience is, "How many of you know what a Toby Show is?" A few of you. Okay. Well, good. So for you that don't, let me briefly explain what it is a Toby Show is. Toby Shows are actually a very important part of America's literary history. Toby Shows are actually kind of the jazz of theater. You know, jazz is it's a uniquely American art form. Only in America where you find the origins of jazz music. Same thing with Toby Shows. Toby Shows it's pure 100% Americana. Toby Shows began roughly around the time of the American Revolution with traveling shows that went from town to town. As time went on, Toby Shows traveled from town to town. They would set up in, actually they were repertory shows. They weren't known as Toby Shows. They were known as repertory theater that would travel from town to town. They would, most time they would go to a town and set up for a few days, and while they were there, usually the kids in town would make a couple extra pennies to set up the chairs, or put up the tent, or put up posters around town, or maybe hand out programs. That was all part of the experience of those shows. Well, every show, every production company usually had 2 or 3 shows that they did in repertory. And they also had specialty acts that went along with it. They had orators, they had singers, they had jugglers, they had flame eating, knife throwing people, you know, those types of acts, okay? Also, in every night of the show, there was part of the show that was a melodrama. Melodramas were very popular during that time of history. And in these melodramas, there was a central character. His name was Toby. And now there are several different versions of where the name Toby came from. But in my world, it's easy to tell you, the central character's name was Toby. And in this melodrama, as all melodramas mostly are, it's good over evil. And Toby was a young boy who bested a city slicker. And it depended on what part of the country that you were in, depended on what type of character Toby was. In the Ozarks, he'd be a hillbilly. In the Northwest, he'd be a lumberjack. Down south, he'd be a cowboy, so you get the picture. So anyway, these shows traveled all over, and they traveled from town to town, set up a tent, maybe do it in a barn, and there was lots of singing and dancing, comedy, and general hilarity. It was a lot of fun. So, that basically is the Toby Show structure. Now, to kind of give you an idea, or the history of my Toby Show, or Shad's show, I would say, really, we'd have to talk about the very beginning, because it's a wonderful story. We're all here for the same reason. We all are. We have something in common here, and the reason we're all here is because of Shepherd of the Hills. That's why. It really is. And when the book was published in 1907, it was a phenomenon. It was, because things were different back there, folks. You know that there was no television, no internet, none of that. It was the written word and what happened on stage, and someone on the back porch playing. That was our culture. That's what we knew. So when people read the book Shepherd of the Hills, it was a phenomenon, and people came from all over to come here. We all know that. Okay. So, enter Lloyd Heller. Lloyd Ender Heller was born in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania in 1914, I believe. He was the only son in a family of girls. His father, Horace, was in construction, had a very successful company there in Stroudsburg, and did a lot of work in the surrounding communities. Lloyd spent his early childhood working with the men, and it was they were bawdy, lusty men who had this life of construction, and Lloyd loved that lifestyle. He loved it. He loved being around those guys. But his other love, besides being with those men, was theater. It was acting. And in those days, vaudeville, which a lot of folks call Toby shows poor man's vaudeville. But anyway, vaudeville was a touring art form that went from town to town, and Stroudsburg happened to be on the vaudeville circuit. So when Lloyd was a little boy, he would sneak into theaters and watch this theater, okay? And watch these shows, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. So when you combined that lifestyle that he knew, he was kind of that rough and tumble, free swinging lifestyle with show business, it was on. He loved it. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be in show business. As time went on, his sister Anna was sickly. She had tuberculosis. As we all remember, that was something we all worried about and thought about and were vaccinated for when we were all kids. We've lived through that. Well, Anna had TB, and in those days, the only cure for TB was through your environment. So she packed up, and her parents paid for her moving to Arizona. Lloyd followed a couple years later, and there attended high school and got involved with local theater. He also, as time went on, became a regular in the Smoke Eye Indian shows that they did there in Prescott. He was a snake dancer. He took live snakes and stuck them in his mouth and danced around. It was crazy. Anyway, Lloyd was caught by the showbiz bug. He bounced around, had a family, lost that family to alcoholism, and continued roaming the country. He was a rambling man. And he came to rest in Coffeyville, Kansas. He was working for the Acme Tool Company and traveling, and came to work there in Coffeyville, Kansas, where he met a young widowed lady by the name of Ruth Souls. Ruth had a couple kids, and she was living there in town, holding it together. She had a bookkeeping business, and over the time that they came to know each other, they both realized they had a love for show business. Okay, so they started taking part in local theater and local theater productions. So this love for show business basically was a commonality that they had, and they fell in love and got married. So Shad now, he's not Shad yet, but he's still Lloyd, and Lloyd is traveling for the Acme Tool Company, and on his travels he comes to Branson, Missouri. He starts looking around, and he had read the Shepherd of the Hills book when he was a kid in Arizona. He loved the book. Well, when he came here, as a lot of folks do, when they come here, if you're a fan of the book and you start looking around, it grabs you. I know when I first came here, I read the novel, and it really happened to me in the wintertime when there's no leaves on the trees, where you can see the depths of the hollows, and it really looks very primitive during those times of year, I think. And whenever I read the book and I saw all of that, it affected me. Well, it affected him too. And while he was in Branson, he attended on the riverfront, right down here, there was a small theater where they did a production of Shepherd of the Hills. He loved it. He loved it so much, he went home and told Ruth about it and brought her back to see it. So they came back to see Shepherd of the Hills. Pardon me, just a moment. And while they were there, they came to know some of the folks here in town. Okay? So they loved it so much, they decided they were going to audition for Shepherd of the Hills, and they did, for that theater, for that show. It was a play there on that stage. They auditioned. Lloyd was cast as the shepherd, and Ruth was cast as Aunt Molly, two main characters in the show. Okay. So what they decided they were going to do is they were going to commute from Coffeyville, Kansas to Branson on the weekends to come do the show, and that's what they did for several years. Well, finally they decided what they really wanted to do was become part of this community, and they moved here lock, stock, and barrel. As time went on, Lloyd, always looking for an opportunity, approached several people, the locals here. He became part of the community. He and he and Ruth both became very much involved in the community. In Plum Nelly days and the root digging days, they were always involved with the Branson culture at that time. And that's when they came to know the Hershams, and they came to know the Trimble family. Lloyd had a friend by the name of Jim Colley. And Jim was a friend he had met in Coffeyville in theater, okay? Well, Lloyd had this idea that he thought he could take Shepherd of the Hills and produce an outdoor drama. Not a bad idea. So he contacted Jim Colley. Jim came out to see him, and they started work on the drama. And they talked about that to several different people. They talked about it to the Hershams. They talked about it to the Trimbles. As a matter of fact, Lloyd, I should say, took the idea to marry Hersham, and we were this close of having Shepherd of the Hills at Silver Dollar City, because that's where Mary approached him and said, "Hey, I'll bankroll this, let's bring it and do it at Silver Dollar City, or as it was known in those days as Marble Cave Park. Right, okay. Okay, so, the Trimbulls owned the homestead where the cabin is, and Lloyd and Ruth both were more interested in exploring that, of perhaps bringing the Shepherd of the Hills to life on the actual location. So he and Jim went to talk to the Trimbulls and go down and look around on the property. And as they were walking down through the property, they saw a tin roof down through the thicket, and they went down there, and there was a barn. And Lloyd walked into the barn. He said that the barn was full of manure, and he was walking around in there, and he made some comment about, boy, this is going to be tough. And he could hear his friend Jim going, yeah, they were having a conversation. And when he walked out of the barn, he realized that Jim was like 60, 70 feet away. He was standing up on the side of the hill. And it was like, bing, this is great. They could hear him. The acoustics in that hollow, as we all know, were perfect. It was God giving him this opportunity, I believe. That's where it happens now. That building it's been taken and redone over the years. That was the barn and the grist mill of J.K. Ross, who became known as Old Matt. Old Matt became that character. All the characters in the book of Shepherd of the Hills were actually real, living, breathing people that lived here, and they all took on different personas and different names in the book. So, as time went on, Lloyd wrote the show. The show opened in 1960, The Shepherd of the Hills. Okay. Moving forward, they had great success for a few years. Well, let's put it this way. It was hard to get things rolling, but when things got rolling, they were rolling, and they were doing very well. People were coming to see Shepherd of the Hills. He won awards, and there were television shows done, and there were movies, and he and Molly were very, very happy, very successful. Well, they lost the lease. This would have been like in 1966. The lease to the theater was lost. And the Old Mill Theater players had no home. And so they were heartbroken, but they knew as they went forward, their lives were in theater. A few short years later, they began doing a vaudeville-style show in downtown Rockaway Beach at a theater called the Royal Palace Theater. They did vaudeville-style theater, which would have been, different shows with the same type of format I just described a while ago, but they weren't at the Toby stage yet. Okay. So they did theater there for a while. Then, as during this whole time, Lloyd also had another persona of Shad. He went to work for Silver Dollar City in 1960. He and Molly both. They opened a blacksmith shop there. Lloyd was no more a blacksmith than I am. But he was an actor, and he learned what he needed to do. His father, back in the days when he was a young boy, if you had a tool that was broken or anything had to be done, you went to a blacksmith. So he always had an interest in it. He knew just enough about it to be dangerous. He knew kind of the whole theory of blacksmithing, but there was a spot that was open for a blacksmith in this village, this new village there at Silver Dollar City. So it only made sense for him to be the village smithy. So he was. He became that. So he had the blacksmith shop there. Let's fast forward, and the Beverly Hillbillies come to Silver Dollar City. The publicity guy who actually gave the name Silver Dollar City to that park was Don Richardson. He and Andy Miller were publicity guys. Andy was an artist, an art director. They worked on shows in Springfield on the Ozarks Jubilee show that was broadcast nationwide from downtown Springfield. Those guys came down here and went to work for Hershey's. Don had the bright idea that whenever someone would come to Silver Dollar City and they bought anything, they would give them change back in silver dollars. So if you're in Ardmore, Oklahoma, and you're reaching in your pocket and pay for gas with silver dollars, somebody says, "Hey, where'd you get that?" "I got it at silver." So that's the whole idea. Don was Don was good friends with Paul Henning. Paul Henning was the producer of Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, all those country-style television shows that were so popular back in the 60s. Ruth and Paul Henning had deep ties in the state of Missouri. Ruth was a graduate of Missouri, MU, and had grown up in this area, in Missouri. And so they had commonalities there, and plus they were in the same business as Don Richardson, and they were friends. And somehow, some way, Don Richardson convinced them that Silver Dollar City was the perfect place for a location shoot of the Beverly Hillbillies. And boy, that's what they did. They loaded up lock, stock, and barrel, brought the whole production company to Branson to shoot the Beverly Hillbillies. So, when they roll into town, as a matter of fact, there's a part in a wonderful book called Shad that was written by Margaret Newton. It's available on Amazon. Just the title is Shad. But she describes in there, and the foreword is written by Buddy Ebsen. And Buddy describes the first day they saw Lloyd Shad Heller. They were coming onto the set, and Shad was working on the forge, and Irene Ryan, who played Granny, said, "Oh, Buddy, look, that blacksmith's going to catch his beard on fire." That's the first words of the book. And then they go on to describe how they met Chad and Molly, and the great relationship that they had. So, over the years, over the next couple of years, Shad was involved with this Beverly Hillbillies. Not only did he do the shows in Branson, but they also loaded him up and flew him out to Hollywood, where they did, I don't know, probably a half a dozen more episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies. During all that time, they became very close friends with Irene and her husband, Irene Ryan, who played Granny. Irene Ryan was a child of Vaudeville herself. And in these times when they were talking about their experiences and where they had come from in show business, they started talking about Toby shows and the experiences that they'd had when they were little, when they were young people. About, like what I said a while ago, about being part of the production, about setting up the chairs and working on the tent and all those things. And so when Irene found out that they were doing a Toby show, a vaudeville show in Rockaway Beach, she said, "Why don't you do a Toby show?" They had already shared with her that they had purchased property on West 76, and they were going to build a settlement there that became known as the Wilderness Settlement. Aunt Molly's General Store was there. That's where Shad had his wintertime forge. There was a fudge shop, an ice cream shop. One of the buildings still is there. They're right on the corner of the property. If you know where Jim Stafford's Theater is, okay, if you look directly to the left as you're looking at the theater, that's where the Wilderness Settlement was, right there. And on the very corner of that property, on the far east side, is what's left of that whole development, right there. Anyway, they explained that they were going to go into this property and they'd like to build a theater, and that's when Granny says, "Why don't you do a Toby show?" So that stuck with Shad and Molly both. They started building a theater. That was the next chapter in their lives in show business. They knew that they were heartbroken over losing the lease at Shepherd Hills. Believe me, friends, I lived with them for several years, and it profoundly affected them till the day they died. It was tough for them. But the thing that happened was they built this theater. They built this little theater, and they didn't know what to call it. But Shad started thinking about, well, you know, every farm had a corn crib, and that's how folks survived. They put their corn in there when times were tough, and they did their own thing. Corn cribs were a symbol of hard times, and people overcome. So he used that symbolism of corn crib to name the theater the Corn Crib Theater. It was wonderful. The Corn Crib Theater opened. They took the show that was in Rockaway Beach, and they rewrote it. They brought it to the Corn Crib Theater. It opened in 1970. A young man by the name of Pat Carithers was responsible of helping Shad write the original show. I have that show. It's part of the blessings that I've had just being associated with Shad. I have a lot of great memorabilia, and I'll bring that and share it with you. Absolutely, you bet. So, the theater opened in 1970. The original Toby Show is that I do. I title my show Shad Heller's Original Toby Show. I came to be with the Toby Show in 1980. When I came to work at Silver Dollar City in 1978, I was going to college in Springfield, and I came down here for a summer job. I wanted to work in the parking lot. And when I came in, they asked me if I ever done anything in show business. I said, yeah, I've sang at some funerals. I'm telling you the truth. It's the truth. I've sang at funerals. I know. Well, the next thing I know, I'm in auditions. So, it's crazy. It's crazy. And I'd never done anything like that. I went in, I was so upset, I was just freaked out, and I auditioned, and they hired me on the spot. Why, I don't know, but they did. And so I started working at Silver Dollar City. I got to know Shad, and all I knew about Shad then was what I'd seen on television, and he also did a lot of television commercials back in those days. There was an ornamental iron place in Nixon that had television commercials, and Shad was their guy. And when I saw him, he had his red shirt. He only wore the red shirt on special occasions. On photo shoots, he had the red shirt on. The first day that I went to Silver Dollar City, they were filming Burl Ives America. It was a made-for-television special sponsored by Pennzoil. And my first day there, I went and put on a costume, and I was an extra. But when I came out, there was Shad, and he was huge, you know, bigger than life, in that red shirt and that big white beard, and I was just, you know, so for a couple of years, I walked wide circles around this man, because he was, I just thought, oh my gosh, that's him. So, as time goes on, you meet folks, you become friends, and people are influential in your lives, and I met a young lady named Janet Henleben. And Jana and I fell in love and began dating and whatnot, and Jana played the role of Miss Lillian in the Toby Show. So, by osmosis, I was part of the deal too. So I followed him, and I was in the show. I worked in the concession stand. I parked cars. I stood out by the road and handed out flyers and things that we all did, which is really neat because it's exactly what he did too. That's what he did when he was young. So that's the tie that was wonderful for me. And I convinced them that I would make a great understudy, so they agreed. So that's what I did. I sat in the concession stand, and I watched the show every night. The Corn Crib Theater, when I came to town, was the place to be. Did they have a lot of folks every night? No, not really. It was a theater that would seat about 300 every night. They did about 60 or 70, about. But it was a place where you went to hang out. They had cheap seats. We all sat in the cheap seats. If you worked at Silver Dollar City, or if you knew the folks that were in the show, you could go sit in the cheap seats for nothing and watch. Night after night, I would go and sit there and watch that, even before I got to know Janet. It was just a place to be. It was a very, very wonderful atmosphere. Shad and Molly were devoted to giving young people opportunities on stage. And that's what they did. Everybody that I know, that I'm associated with in show business from those days, walked right across those stage like that stage, just like I did. Anyway, I became part of that cast as an understudy. One night I got my chance. One of the regulars didn't make the call, and so I took the role of Mr. Bates, which was the bad guy. So I became the bad guy. And I enjoyed that for several years. It was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful. I enjoyed every minute of it. That would have been about 1980. The next year, Shad and Molly decided just to kind of reboot everything. The Toby Show went through The years that I was there, it went through several different versions, always basically the same show. If you go see my show, our show now at Shepherd of the Hills, it's that show. Only there were always different nuances, different versions of that show as we went along. My second year, they decided to reboot everything, keep that show, but take a different slant on it by introducing some characters that used to be in the show. They put them back in. One of those characters was Sweet Sally. When I came to the Toby Show, it was Toby, his brother Zenas, Miss Lillian, who was the femme fatale, and Mr. Bates, and Mr. Posey, who was Shad, and Aunt Kate, which was Molly. That was the cast. But the second year, they decided to add Sweet Sally back in the show. So we had 2 complete casts. Cast A, Cast B, I don't remember which one I was in, but we flip-flopped back and forth. And it was a lot of fun, but it was a mess. It was a total mess. But we got through it. It didn't take long for Shad and Molly to figure out that it's great. You know, all these people were involved, and all these people stayed involved in one form or another. But there was also a business, and they had to make some dough. And so what they were doing there was not working because it was too scattered, and the audience couldn't make a connection, and it's just things you learn in show business. So they settled on one particular cast, and I was blessed to be part of that. Things happened. I became Toby. I followed in the footsteps of Dan Embry. I know a lot of you know Dan. Dan was, he's who I patterned my experience as Toby after. And then as we went along, I became my own guy, but he was the guy that I thought was the best Toby ever, still to this day. Anyway, I became Toby, and the show continued in that form along with Wayne Milnes. A lot of you know Wayne. Wayne passed away just recently, tragically, but what a guy. One of the funniest, most naturally talented, funny men I've ever known. He brought that, he really put that show on the map. He really, really did. When Wayne came to the Toby Show, he came with his friend and college cohort, Ray Toller. Now, when they were kids, they had their own act. They did comedy shows for schools and for funerals and weddings, you know, that type of thing. But anyway, when they came to the Toby Show, they brought their own act. If you go see the Toby Show now, there's a thing called the dummy bit where Zenas sits on the knee of Toby, and it's like he's a ventriloquist. You know, he says it's the dummy bit. That came from Wayne. So Wayne and Ray Toller brought a lot to the Toby Show. Hi, Linda. Ray was Toby as well, and Wayne was Zenas. He'll always be Zenas to me. Anyway, that was a cast. Tom Rose, some of you probably know Tommy Rose. He's a longtime Branson resident. The last year that I was involved in the Toby Show, he was in it. He played Mr. Bates. The Bakers are here today. Dale, their son Dale, was a drummer in our show. Little Linda. Linda was a little girl about, how old was Linda back then?
About 9 or 10.
About 9 or 10. She was very small, diminutive, to say the least. She was not very big, but she could play piano, and we redressed her in a hillbilly costume. We brought her out. She played a silent character. She always did everything in pantomime. And with her and Shad together doing pantomime, it was wonderful. That was one thing we did with them. But she would come out and play the piano, and she absolutely owned the show. She really did. People loved her very much. The piano player's name was Cosmo. The drummer's name was Gizmo, and she was Slow-Mo. So every time I see her on the internet, I refer to, hey, Slow-Mo. We had some fun, that's for sure. Our last year of that particular form of the Toby Show was in 1985. I just saw out here in the museum, there's a wonderful display of some Toby Show memorabilia, and what you'll see if you go out and look on the big display is the cover of a study guide. And let me explain what happened there. In '85, we were approached by some folks who lived in Springfield, Paul and Martha Katona. Paul was the chief engineer for Channel 33 that had just come on the air. And part of being a chief engineer for that television station was he and Martha lived at the base of an antenna in Fordley. You know where those are. Okay, they lived there in that house. But they came to see the Toby Show and they believed in it. They had an idea, they had vision. And they mortgaged that home, took that money, and produced the video that we did in 1985. Their concept was to take this video, combine it with a study guide. Back then video was all on VHS tape. Take that and then distribute it to schools. Use it as a tool for education. And it was a great idea, wonderful idea. So when you see that out there, that's what that is. So 1985 was the last year that our cast was together. Again, after the end of that year, Hellers decided it was time to reboot, and they did. We all moved on and did our other things, but this Toby Show survived. It went on, I think, for another couple years. I think 87 or 88 was the last year of the Toby Show. Shad's health was declining, and that's why the show ended then. So, the Toby Show was given to me by Shad. One day, he came to me and handed me a piece of paper. Shad had his own stationery. It was pretty cool. I mean, how many people had their own stationery? I mean, he had his picture in the corner and it had Shad Heller on it. It was, really neat. Yeah, I know. And so he scribed on this piece of paper, I give to Jae McFerron all rights, blah, 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 to the Toby Show in perpetuity. So he gave me the show. We kind of sat on that for a while because Molly didn't know about that, and neither did her son Bob, so we just kind of sat on it for a while when everyone passed away. On the day that Shad passed away, or at his funeral, his daughter Diane was there, and I said, look, I showed her what he had given me, and she said, by all means, please do that. The only thing I ask is that always put my dad's name on the show. So that's what we've done, and that's what I will always do. That's why even now, if you pick up a rack card, it says Shad Heller's original Toby Show, which gives me great thrill, and I'm very proud of the fact that Lloyd Shad Heller's name is still, you can find it here in Branson. It was gone a long time. I had that show for years, didn't do anything with it, and I felt badly about it. I really did, because all those times, the opportunity that I was given, I kind of felt that mantle of, I need to be doing something with this show. I need to give others the opportunity to do what I was able to do. And God touches your life in special ways. I had no intention, I had no idea that we would be doing this, and this opportunity was brought to me. Phone rang one day, and it was Jeff Johnson, the co-owner of Shepherd of the Hills. And he said, I've seen your show on the internet. Would you like to sit down and talk about it? Sure. So here we are. And we are very, very happy, very excited to be part of Shepherd of the Hills. And the thing, to wrap this all up in a little bow, Lloyd Heller began his career in Branson at Shepherd of the Hills. He was the guy. He was the guy that put it on the map, that outdoor drama. 60 years later, his show, the Toby Show, is back where he began. And to me, that's just, I couldn't ask for anything. That's an incredible blessing. It's incredible that I've been chosen to carry this on. The official announcement comes out on November 4th, so you newspaper guys. But the Toby Show was voted best new show in Branson this year. That new show. Thank you very much. The voting was done on bestofbranson.com, and it covers all sorts of things, restaurants and hotels and things. And we were in a category, and I got a phone call about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Guess what? So the official announcement comes out on November 4th. So anyway, but that's my story as far as the history of the Toby Show and my association with it in Branson. Be happy to answer any questions. Anybody got any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I don't think they know where his name Shad came from.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you what I know, because I've heard several versions, and I've heard several versions from him. Here's what he told me. He said when he was researching the role of a blacksmith, he was looking for a name. And Shad, in his research, he found that Shad was another name or a term for a blacksmith. And that was a traditional blacksmith name. What do you know? Is that what you know too? Yeah. Good.
He found it in the National Geographic.
What's that?
The information was in the National Geographic article.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, that's where I got it. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. Okay, but that's what I know about it. He and Mom, yeah, Don?
Dave, one of the lines in the show, and I know you did them all, but where they would just say, Toby, when they were looking for him, and Toby, or to be, you know.
Toby or not Toby?
Give us a rendition of this.
You say, Toby or not Toby? Wayne Milnes was, people always come to us after the show and say, man, oh man, how do you work with that guy? You never know what he's going to say. Well, that's the magic of good comedy and good theater is that it looks that way. It does. But we knew exactly what he was going to say, except on occasion. On occasion. Now, let me say this. When he said something that we weren't expecting, he said it again every night after that. Because a good comic knows when you get a hit on a line, you keep doing it until somebody says, don't do that anymore. Well, that's one thing about Lloyd, or one thing about Shad. You know, people say, oh, he must have been a great director. No, really. He wasn't. He was an incredible example. That's what he was. He was an incredible example. I watched him like a hawk. You know, in his last days that I was working with him, he had COPD badly. He had emphysema, and it finally got him, but it was... And in backstage at the Toby Show, there was one air-conditioned room. Just one, and it was where we dressed, where the guys dressed, thank God. But there was a recliner in that room. It was Red Foley's old recliner that came from the Ozarks Jubilee show. I didn't know that until years later. Shad said, well, you know, this is Red Foley's chair. I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. So anyway, he sat in Red Foley's chair before the show. And he would sit there in the last days, and he was so weak he could barely breathe. He would get up and he would put his makeup on. Mr. Posey was a clown character. Shad did a lot of clowning. Lloyd did in his early days for Ringling Brothers. He began as a roustabout. He would help them with the tents, and he would haul in the animals and whatnot, set up the chairs. But he also got his break as a clown too. So he was great at that. So at night he'd put on his grease paint. He'd put his nose. He was barely moved. And he would go, and we'd get him out, and his entrance was through an outhouse. The outhouse had a false back in it. He would go in there and sit, and on cue, the door would swing open, and he would begin his clowning. Well, you could barely get him in that box. He was so weak. I'm telling you what, folks, when the door opened, it was showtime, and he was on, right? The Toby Show was at the Corn Crib Theater, and the Corn Crib Theater looked like a house. And the stage was the front porch of the cabin, and the stage was probably, I don't know, 36 inches off the ground. And so there were like 4 or 5 steps up to there. And he would come out and run up those steps every night. He was full of life and energy. He was such a great example of total commitment to what he did. Oh my gosh. He was a wonder to watch every night. And it's, you know, he was something. He sure was. Anyway, he was, the Toby Show was a wonderful thing. I'm just so happy to bring it back. I lost my train of thought, but if you have any other questions, be happy. Yes, sir.
What did you do in the meantime from 1985 till 2019?
Oh, boy. I kept busy.
Yeah.
Well, oddly enough, my next job after the Toby Show, well, I stayed at Silver Dollar City for 35 seasons. Anyway, when I left the Toby Show, my next job was at Shepherd of the Hills. I went and I portrayed Buck Thompson for 2 or 3 years. And after that, I went into management at Silver Dollar City, worked there a couple years, and did a live radio show, or live to tape radio show with Jim Stafford and all the stars of Branson at that time, Willie Nelson and then Tim Campbell. You know, it was a magical time then. Anybody was in that show. Long story short, I got offered a job by Jim Stafford, and I left Silver Dollar City and went there for a couple of years. And just kind of bounced around into Comedy Jamboree for a year or two, and raised a family. My wife Helen and I met at Silver Dollar City. She was a saloon girl. I was the cowboy. We wrote a show at Silver Dollar City for the saloon, and anyway, that's where we got to know one another. Fell in love, got married, and I have 3 wonderful sons. 2 are college graduates, both have degrees in film. They're both filmmakers. I'm very proud of them both. And my youngest is 16 years old. He's in high school, and his time is spent playing football right now. So we're still kind of in that stage, and but it's been a wonderful life. You know, it's been everything that's happened has happened for a reason.
So were you from Branson originally?
No, I was raised in Southeast Missouri. I'm from Chaffee, Missouri. I graduated high school in 1975, and as soon as I got the cap and gown off, I left, basically, and came to college at SMS, Missouri State. My first love in show business was radio. That's what I really loved more than anything. That's where I got to know Chris Eilers. What's your last name now, Chris?
Bohins?
Okay, that's all right.
Bohins?
Bohins? Okay, that's where we met. We worked at the radio station together when it was down in Turkey Creek in Hollister. But that was my first love, and I decided that for whatever reason, it's funny when you look back on things, there was no reason for me to go to Missouri State for broadcasting. There was no program to speak of. It really didn't exist. But I went, and so I showed up in Springfield and went to school there for a couple of years, and I met a guy in speech class, and I know you people know this guy. His name is Joey Taylor. Joey Taylor was the face of the Stone County Fair. He did the commercials for Stone County Fair for years. And that's how I knew him when I went into class. There's this guy, the Stone County Fair guy. So we got to become friends. And one day in class, he said, "Hey, you know, they're hiring people at Silver Dollar City." So that's how I ended up down there. So it's funny how your life takes us. You know, here I am. Yes, ma'am.
There used to be a show down in the Opera House. It had Corns a-Crackin'. Did you write that?
Portions of it.
That was a great show.
Well, thank you.
I love that.
Thank you. I wrote the comedy for it.
I just remember you saying the corns are cracking.
Well, Sean Murray is a good friend of mine, and Sean was a producer at Silver Dollar City at that time, and he and a couple other fellas from Nashville and whatnot got together, and they came up with a concept to recreate the Ozark Jubilee show. We all thought it would go, whew, people would really latch onto that and would really want to know more about it. And not so much, really. I mean, I don't know what happened, but the history of the Ozark Jubilee shows is rich. You know, with all the people. Springfield was this close to being Nashville. I mean, everybody was there. The only thing they weren't doing was recording. And that was the difference. But all the television, all that stuff that came out of there back in those days was out of downtown Springfield on Walnut Street. So anyway, yeah, so we had a show in the Opera House where we recreated portions of that radio broadcast. Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yes, sir.
When they lost the lease at Silver Dollar City to put on the play, how many years was it before they got it back and started putting it on again?
Well, let me be clear. I didn't make that clear. I'm sorry. When in 1960, the Trimbles, all that land up there, that homestead, the Omat's cabin, all that, belonged to a family named Ross. Sometime like during the 20s or 30s, the traffic became so annoying, people banging on their door at night, they had to move away from there. They went and lived in another town, and that property sat empty for a long time.
That was the original family?
Yes, sir. The Ross family. Yes, sir. And so along comes Mary Trimble, Mary and Mark, Mary and her son Mark.
Bruce was Mary's
Husband?
husband.
Yeah, well, Mark was their son, yeah. And together, they purchased that property. And so, as the story goes, Lloyd approached, after Lloyd had taken Jim Colley and they had gone down and found that this place was perfect for the outdoor drama, they wrote the show and approached the Trimbles and leased the theater, that production company. It was, and the Trimbles were all part of that as well. And they called themselves the Old Mill Theater Players Incorporated. It was an incorporated LLC by today's standards. So they leased the property, opened the show in '60, and that show ran gangbusters. Well, like I said a while ago, it was up and down. They went through some lean years, but when it finally caught fire, it caught fire, and they lost the lease there. The Hellers lost their lease. The show continued on. It never missed a beat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Trimbles had it, and they kept right on going. And I think what they did then, they decided just to produce it themselves instead of having an independent producer, who was what Lloyd did.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Jay, one other thing, you maybe you can clear it up, but at one time, I remember Southern Illinois University out of Carbondale, their group came down and they put the Shepherd of Hills play on down here at the campground, almost under the High Bridge.
Right.
Down there. Was Shad involved?
Yeah.
At that point? Okay.
Yeah, there were, well, no, this was before my time, so I don't know what venue was there. I don't know if it was outdoor or if it was what, but there was a theater there. And when he first came to this country, that's the first show he saw was there. Now, I don't know anything about the Southern Illinois.
I didn't know it was down there, then it ended up at the Shepherd.
Right. Well, it was a different show, totally different. And I don't know what the form the show took on that stage. Lloyd's idea was to take that book and encapsulate it into a one evening's time. The book is if you read the book, which is wonderful, it happens over a long period of time. Long period. You go to see the show now, it's a one-night event. And to do that was really took some thinking to bring all the elements into it, you know. I invite you, if you're interested in the history of Lloyd Eller, the book Shad, as I said a while ago, is by Margaret Newton. I was working at she came and lived on the property. She lived at the Corn Crib Theater one summer and wrote, did research and wrote the book. And it's a great book about his history, the whole thing about the Beverly Hillbilly years, and then the years of the Toby Show and all those things. The history of Lloyd, his early years, is very fascinating. His struggle with alcoholism is very inspiring. Very inspiring. He was very instrumental in a lot of these groups here in town were of his creation, And so, yes, ma'am.
Do you know if the Toby Show's gonna be back next year?
I hope so. I hope so. I don't know for sure. I've got a feeling now that I told you what, there's a little marketing power in that, you know. So Shepherd of the Hills, I don't know if you know this, back in the springtime was voted through USA Today as America's #1 adventure park, which was a huge hit as far as marketing is concerned. Shepherd of the Hills, at one time, as you all know, was the #1 game in town. Even after Silver Dollar City came, it was known as Shepherd of the Hills country. Everywhere I went, there was a placemat on my table that said the story of Shepherd of the Hills. Everywhere you went, all the racks in town were Shepherd of the Hills racks. And that all changed somewhere along the early '90s, where they decided to rebrand it as Ozark Mountain Country. So, anyway.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
A couple of footnotes. We have a Shepherd of the Hills rack out front, by the way. And also, we do have information about the show that the Southern Illinois people did downtown. They had a theater down there. And if you're interested, if you want to know more about it, we can provide you some information about it. Also, the book Shad, there are some copies available online. Not only Amazon, there's another site I could send you to, abebooks.com. That's a database of millions of volumes by thousands of booksellers, and there are several copies there available. And you can often deal directly with the dealer about it. Anyway, thank you again for coming. Remember, the veterans next month, we're always the 3rd Tuesday of the month. Something's happening here, and you are part of that happening. Please join us again. Thank you.
Thank you.